Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Picture this. You go to the grocery store in hopes of buying some ground beef. You see the products, you see there's lean, there's the extra lean, you got the 80/20, pork, beef, all the options are there. You pick one out, bring it home, make a beautiful pasta dish with it, some ground beef and some pasta. And after eating it, maybe a few days later, a month later even, you realize that the meat that you brought home from the grocery store that day was made from a cloned animal. How would you feel? How would you feel if when you went to the grocery store that day and you looked through all the beef products, you didn't see any labels that said this was from a cloned animal? Well, that could be your very experience starting next year. Health Canada has changed regulations to products from cloned animals, meat and pork products, that will no longer require them to have labels indicating that they're made from a cloned animal. Health Canada says there is really no difference. The products are safe to eat and they're good to consume. But how would you feel knowing that you didn't make that informed choice yourself to decide whether or not the meat that you wanted to eat was from a cloned animal? I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, I'm talking to Sylvain Charlebois, director of the Agr-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, to discuss what the upcoming changes to Canada's food regulation means for your dinner table. Sylvain, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So let's get right into it. What exactly is meat cloning or animal cloning? How is it done? Where does it take place?
I think every time we say meat cloning, everyone thinks about Dolly, the sheep. It's the first animal that was basically cloned back in, I believe, in 1996. And since then, things have evolved. I mean, essentially, cloning is about taking an egg from a female and basically inserting a DNA sample into that egg and create some sort of a fetus, and you basically take that fetus and put it into a host, which would be a female, of course. So you're basically optimizing genetics. Normally in livestock, you basically shop for samples and to get the best genetic possible for your herd. With cloning, you basically skip a few steps. You can replicate what has worked for you as a rancher, as a farmer. You can actually have several of the same, animal. And that's what cloning is all about. So this is about optimizing genetics. And so over time, I would say that instead of shopping around for semen and making sure that you're matching the right male with the right female, you're basically saving a little bit of money and time to get the best result possible. This is the other thing that a lot of people confuse clone meat with lab-grown cellular meat.
Okay.
And they're two very different things. Lab-grown meat is when you replicate cells in a bioreactor. So you start from scratch. You don't need animals. You just need a biopsy to extract a cell from an animal, and you replicate that cell into a bioreactor. That's not what cloning is. Cloning is you work with live animals, really. Because on social media, there's a lot of confusion. I think a lot of people think that cloning is lab grown, but it's not. It's different.
Right. So when it comes to then meat cloning, is the products that are used in meat cloning, is that exactly the product of the cloning, or is it the animal or the offspring of the cloning?
So what is being suggested, and of course there hasn't been an announcement yet, but my understanding, based on papers and documents that we've received as part of the consulting process led by Health Canada, is that we're talking about commercializing the offspring of clone animals, not the clone animals per se.
Right. Okay. Now, objectively speaking, you did say it was kind of like picking the best of what you could get. What are the benefits to cloning animals, both economically and environmentally? What's the general appeal here? I know it's a little controversial, but generally speaking, why is it good?
Well, it's good. I mean, I know it's hard for some people to understand, but you have to think of an animal, of livestock, like a car, for example. Each car will have different features. You have to basically optimize a car by using certain parts. Well, an animal is made of different parts that you sell out to the market, and so you want the best leg, the best sirloin, the best ribs, and things like that. And so genetics can actually allow you to achieve that if you actually work the genetic supply chain carefully and efficiently. So it really basically helps the farmer to get the best product possible out the door when they go to auction.
Now, you mentioned some regulation changes with Health Canada. Let's get into that. They changed the regulations surrounding novel foods. They plan to exclude cloned meat from this category, which means they don't have to be labeled as cloned, and they're not subjected to pre-market regulations. Now, Health Canada says the food is safe and it's not different from products made from a natural animal. But not knowing where your steak was made or how it was made, that's a bit shocking. Before getting your before getting your thoughts on the move, what do you think Health Canada's rationale was here?
I think they're just trying to make a science based decision based on how they define novel foods. And if you look at the hard science, I think Health Canada's assessment is accurate. I mean that it is true that you're basically end up with a product that is safe to eat, that won't compromise the health of Canadians per se. But this is where I think a lot of people are concerned is that yes, there's the hard science, but there's also there are social sciences involving people eating food. And, and perceptions are incredibly important, and so you can actually argue all day that the product is safe, and you're basically ending up with similar products on the market versus what we've seen over the last few decades. At the end of the day, you are feeding humans, and humans, when they hear the word cloning, they may not associate cloning or any use of high technologies as compatible to food, to traditions, to their culture, etc. Which is why you know innovation and technological evolutions are perceived very differently in food versus other sectors like automotive, pharmaceuticals, banking, things like that. So there's always been a very dysfunctional relationship between innovation in food versus consumers and what they're willing to accept or not.
Right. You did mention earlier on that there was no hard press release for this, and it you kind of had to go searching for this update.
Well, this is so. I mean, the reason why we are talking about this right now is that I have friends who are in the food industry, and they did have a meeting with Health Canada, and they did say that they wouldn't be making any public statement. They would actually reconnect with the 1,200 stakeholders that were part of the process, the evaluation process, and that would be it. There wouldn't be any press release whatsoever, and of course, the product wouldn't be labeled. So it would be basically you would have access to offsprings of cloned animals without knowing as a consumer. And frankly, I think it's yet another example of how Health Canada assesses how Canadians can react to certain technologies. I mean, on the one side, you have really technologies that are allowing the industry to become more efficient, to save money, really. But without labeling, without communications, how can you allow consumers to benefit from these advances? And basically, all we're doing is to increase margins for an industry, and that's basically it.
Do you eat meat? Let me just ask you that. Do you eat meat and pork products?
Of
Ha-
course, absolutely,
so,
yeah.
what's your reaction to this personally, as someone that eats and someone that buys meat and poultry in Canada? What's your personal reaction?
I mean, I'm not affected personally. I think it's okay to eat offsprings of cloned animals because I've actually read the science. So I don't necessarily need to be told what is coming from cloning, what product is actually stemming from cloning, and what products aren't stemming from cloning. But my reaction was that I think the policy shows a lack of empathy and respect towards consumers because I do know that a lot of people, a lot of Canadians are asking questions right now and would want to know. And frankly, going back to the economics of the supply chain, if we don't set clear rules at retail with labeling, proper labeling, again, consumers will never benefit from technological advances. And so if we say offer to Canadians two pieces of meat, one comes from a clone animal, the other is not at the same price, my guess is that most people will actually take the conventional piece of meat. But if the cloned piece of meat is half price, that becomes interesting. It becomes an interesting dilemma. I suspect that a lot of people that were hesitating at the same price would consider the half price meat, especially right now with the price of beef, for example, which has really skyrocketed in recent years.
Food choices is very personal, some of it relating back to ethical and cultural and even religious beliefs. How do these changes play into those choices for Canadians?
I think, I mean, I think it's a dangerous road we're taking right now because we're not informing the public in terms of how food is made properly, at least. And I think Canadians deserve to know. They deserve to know exactly what how food was made, and people who have become skeptical of meat consumption in general for a variety of different reasons, animal welfare, for example, the environment. Well, we're basically giving them yet another reason to be skeptical because all of a sudden we're making meat in all sorts of different ways without disclosing to the consumer. But of course, going back to cloning, if you're, let's say, if it's not labeled and you're concerned about animal welfare, let's say that you do eat meat, but you are concerned about animal welfare and you want to make sure that the entire supply chain operates with the respect towards animal uh, in their minds all the time, for example, and that you want the killing, for example, the harvesting, as we call it now, to be humane. Well, cloning is has its set of challenges. There's a lot of trial and error going on there. It doesn't always work. And a lot of people are very concerned and aren't necessarily willing to accept that. So that's why I think it's very important that we respect the consumer in the end.
You mentioned that when Canadians hear cloning or the words like cloning and science and stuff like that, they get a little nervous when it comes to their food choices. Do you think if there was more transparency around the whole process and around how things moved within Health Canada, Canadians would be a bit more on board and willing to try?
I would say so. I mean, we're again, what's disappointing about this episode is that we're repeating the same mistake over and over again, and I'll go back to the '90s where when GMOs entered the food supply, genetic engineering for the first time, early '90s. So the giants, the biotech giants like Monsanto at the time, basically decided to sell a new technology to farmers without even bothering to establish a very solid moral contract between the industry and consumers. And they're still paying for it today because all of a sudden you have many interest groups talking about frankenfoods, talking about how unnatural a lot of the food that we eat is, and things like that. And it's all about perceptions. When you look at the science, it's pretty clear that what's happening in the industry is very safe. But it doesn't matter. I mean, people will believe what they want to believe. And if there is this void of information at retail, people will interpret all the information on the internet the way they want. And in the era of misinformation, that's a very dangerous path to take.
I want to ask you, how important are food labels to the Canadian consumer? Of course, people want to know what they're buying. But from a marketing point of view, not all labels on food products mean exactly what they say. If the word natural is on a cereal box, it doesn't necessarily mean the cereal is natural.
No,
It could mean it's the
that's right.
branding, or the marketing. How much importance is placed on labels for Canadians?
I think it's actually growing. It's a work in progress for sure, but I think it's growing. I do believe that labeling and packaging, particularly, are the best tools when it comes to risk communication. And one example of that is on January 1st, 2026. You'll now see labels on packages telling you, the consumer, if a product has too much fat, sodium, or sugar. There'll be a little logo somewhere on the package telling you that, and that's. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think, I mean, really, for the first time, we're seeing Health Canada embracing the power of packaging and labeling to basically tell Canadians what is healthy and what is not so healthy, so people will know what they're actually buying. Well, it's the same. I think it's the same for technologies up the food chain. Even though it's remote, it's far, it's it's coming from this black box of up the food chain. People may not relate to farming or biotechnologies and things like that, but we need to allow Canadians to befriend any technologies, really, and we haven't done that. We fear that we would scare consumers as a result of giving them some information. Well, maybe, but I think that's really what we need to do. We need to inform the public. And if there is no market for cloning, for example, well, we need to respect the market. I mean, we haven't really done that. And that's how moral contracts are established between the industry and consumers.
Do you think voluntary labeling by certain brands could restore some level of consumer trust, or do you think consumers will want to see that Health Canada, that official branding?
Well, that's what we have with genetic engineering. We have a voluntary base policy, and look what where we are now. I mean, I don't think we've actually advanced anything. I think a lot of people are comfortable with genetic engineering. When you walk into a grocery store, 75% that's processed uh, actually has a genetic engineered ingredient. And so I think a lot of people are comfortable with that, but a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. And I suspect that a lot of people don't even know that genetic engineering is actually in most products today. And so again, there's a lot of evolution happening, lots of great things happening in agri-food, but we're not taking the time to inform the public in terms of how these technologies can benefit them, the consumer.
How can the government, you think, foster trust in food manufacturing and regulations? Because, a part of this upcoming regulation change, there were consultations with the general public, as per the Health Canada website. They said they consulted their stakeholders and some general public. Um, do you think that was enough?
Well, I mean, I would want to know who. I
Right.
mean, because based on their reaction to my op-ed of 2 weeks ago, it seems as though few people were consulted, and my guess is that they were probably invited in the summer, for example, and that's probably by design to get the least attention as possible. And so those are the things you got to be careful as a regulator. I think you want to be purposeful, you want to be proactive, and allow people to engage. I know of at least, I mean, hundreds of people, because I've been asked to give the email to different folks to submit a complaint or comments to Health Canada. I've been the last 2 weeks. I've been overwhelmed by email. So clearly something was missing. I think a lot of people are caught by surprise, and I think that's why we're seeing the reaction we're seeing on social media.
Do you think the changes will impact food import or exports? Like, will this have any effect on trade agreements or supply chains with other countries?
Possibly, and that's probably one of the reasons why they're keeping it a little hush hush, because they don't want to disrupt the ability of the industry to export abroad. I don't see it personally, but I suspect that given what's happening with the United States right now, seeing the Canadian economy wanting to decouple a little bit from the American economy and look at, say, a market like Europe, for example, I'd say that probably cloning may not be a word they want to hear. But so that I think there's a lot of that going on too, and so I'm absolutely fully aware of all this, and I can understand why the industry wants to be extremely careful. But at the end of the day, like I said, consumers are the one making a decision. It's their bodies, it's their food, and without consumers, there is no food industry. So it has to start there.
All right. Sylvain Charlebois, director of the Agr-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Thank you so much for this interesting conversation. It'll be an interesting trip to the grocery store in 2026.
Absolutely. Take care.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Find us on X at TheBigStoryFPN or send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. If you know a friend that might like this episode, be sure to share it with them. The Big Story publishes new episodes Monday through Friday. I'm Maria Kestane. Thanks for listening.